Welcome back to the SampanViking on China channel, and it's another upload in a really a matter of days. A very rapid level of uploads from me. I usually do it only about once a week, maybe once a fortnight, but with events in Eastern Europe moving fairly quickly, a lot of developments and a lot of tension. I think I just have a great desire to keep up to date with it all, and to likewise share those thoughts with those so minded to listen. Today, the talk really is about two related subjects. One is Belarus, the Belarus question, and sanctions. And I suppose really I will come into this by saying. I'm going to start with Belarus. I mean, it's always a difficult way when you can start. Which end of a magnet do you start with, the north or the south? I'm going to start with Belarus and say what exactly is happening with Belarus, because I think there is a chance that an awful lot of what we've seen over the last 3-4 months now is quite major misdirection from the NATO side. We've said all along, those of us that watch such things, what is the end game? What is the plan? Why is the West doing this when it seems, looking at the results it's achieving, to be such a counterproductive strategy? What is the objective? Why would they do it? And in terms of Ukraine, it was mind-boggling. It's one of the reasons why this subject is so compelling. It is so mind-boggling as to why they would do it, or if they are doing it, why people who seem to be of such high caliber, or so we are told, the leaders of the free world, are making such a pig's ear of it. But maybe they are playing a different game altogether. And I do wonder if the name of that other game is not indeed Belarus. And the reason for this is very, very simple. Look at all the fuss that they made when Russia moved troops into Belarus for exercises. All the ridiculous claims about they're going to strike from there, and it started to make me think then at the beginning. And I suppose really the easiest way to go back and to look at a very potted, quick history of the relations between Russia and Belarus since the end of the Soviet Union. Mr. Lukashenko has been in power throughout that time. He took control at the breakup of the Soviet Union. He is there today. He's not liked by the West. Obviously, he is an authoritarian in the Soviet style. But his relationship with Russia, I don't pretend to know what his relationship with Yeltsin was. Probably didn't think much of him. Not many people did. But his relationship with Putin was, for most of the time that Putin's been in power, has been quite frosty. They didn't get on particularly well at all. Uh, and behind that, I think, is a not unreasonable desire by the likes of Lukashenko and, in fact, Yanukovych in the Ukraine to say, well, here we are, we're newly created nations, we sit between East and West, we are a bridgehead, we are therefore in a position to gain significant benefits from our contacts with both. The old neutral zone between the great power blocks where fun games and business can take place. And I think this is initially what they intended to do. Well, we saw really from the beginning of the first millennium of this century with the first with the first regime change operation that the West weren't satisfied with this, and this culminated, of course, in Ukraine in 2014 with the Maidan regime change operation, the Color Revolution. And of course, Belarus has not been exempt from such treatment itself. Lukashenko was himself the target of a regime change operation last year. This operation was soundly defeated, no doubt because him and his ally in Moscow have taken the lessons on board that where they dropped the ball, perhaps you could say, in the Ukraine, and made sure that it didn't happen today. Some people have said that Belarus is even more strategically important to Russia even than the Ukraine. That's arguable. Both are quite important in their own way, but the Belarus does have significant strategic importance in many ways. So if there was a regime change, successful regime change operation in Belarus, that would weaken Russia's position quite dramatically. It would significantly isolate the enclave of Kaliningrad on the Baltic, even great distance then from the Russian homeland. That could make its continued existence virtually impossible in many respects, and it would greatly ensure NATO's ability to secure its Baltic state flank there at the top. Conversely, by bringing Belarus firmly into the fold, then this reverses that. It makes Kaliningrad far more secure, and it makes technically the Baltic states a lot more insecure, as it also will be they will effectively be surrounded on three sides by Russian forces. Now, let's not forget Belarus is a member of the CSTO. It is an ally, therefore, of Russia. That might have in the past have been lip service more than anything else. But what is quite clear, the attempted color revolution attempt to remove Lukashenko last year has only propelled him firmly into the embraces of Vladimir Putin and has made that alliance a genuine fact. I do speculate whether or not it was they were looking for a NATO was looking for a pretext to actually launch a military operation into Belarus. It sounds risky if it is CSTO, but it's not. It's the CSTO isn't necessarily like NATO in terms of a right, an obligation to defend. I'm not sure about that. I will need to check. I should have checked before I started. There we are. Time presses. But I don't think it's to the same level, and there is maybe not the same level of obligation on the parties to come to that defence if they really don't want to. And if it was only a lukewarm relationship, maybe Russia may have thought twice, or maybe this was the rationale, perhaps, inside the circles of NATO, who tend to look at things rather strangely, that only they have integrity and nobody else does. There you go. But irrespective, even though it might seem far-fetched, and as I talk about it, I do say, well, it does seem rather strange, but it does actually fit the facts. If this was a distraction, because what happened? Washington started talking about a Russian invasion of Ukraine. They started talking about huge numbers of troops being built up on the borders. Again, as I've said, these are only claims made by Washington. They've never been confirmed by the Russian side, and Russia has always denied having any plan to invade the Ukraine. So all the fuss and all the hysteria is coming purely from the Western side, primarily out of Washington. And Washington is using this as an excuse to bring further forces from America into Europe and to station it on the eastern border of NATO, many of which countries border Belarus. So we start to wonder, was this part of the plan in order to force a provocation inside of Ukraine, to claim that Belarus had been taken part and to use that as a pretext to continue and finish the regime change operation started last year to get rid of Lukashenko and to install a Maidan-style puppet regime inside of Belarus, and with all the attendant strategic headaches that would cause for Russia as its security situation on its western borders deteriorate even further. I suspect so. And so when 30,000 Russian troops went on exercise into Belarus, the howls that went up from Washington and London were something to behold. It didn't really make that much sense, but maybe it was upsetting a genuine plan. The West have been very keen about saying how they've blown Putin's secret plans and they have intelligence and this is it, we're sharing it. Well, maybe Putin's shown to them that he's blown their secret plans and has intelligence, and he's not talking about it, he's just acting on it. We now know that these troops are going to stay in Belarus, and that does rather sound to me as if they are there to guarantee the territorial security of that country. So that, in effect, the word is now going out, if there had been any ambivalence on this before, that an attack by NATO on Belarus will be counted as an attack by NATO on sovereign Russian territory. The alliance is now that harsh, that close, as we've seen with the attendance of Mr. Lukashenko at high-level meetings and very sensitive military drills with the strategic forces in the area. Because again, also Belarus gave up its nuclear arsenal at the end of the Cold War, just as Ukraine did. So again, more showing that that this is what a genuinely loyal ally does for its friends, and not those that simply talk tough and then run out as soon as the situation seems to be getting more real. And the situation, of course, in Ukraine does seem to be getting more real, with more fighting across the contact line. Still artillery, civilians being withdrawn. I do wonder if there's any difference between those that have Russian citizenship and those do not. If the ones being withdrawn are Russian citizens, again, that would be a likely explanation. Pardon me, a country getting its nationals out of a territory where bad things may be about to happen. Um, what is going to happen in the Ukraine is still an absolute headache. And the one thing I would say onto this, we've looked at what Putin might do, or how he might react, what the situation is. I'm also going to very quickly look at the role that sanctions can play in this, because it hasn't been, I haven't certainly, and a lot of people haven't really factored that in. They've talked about sanctions, what the sanctions are, how the degree they might be levied, but nobody's really looked at how they might be applied, the circumstances. And I think that is actually a major omission, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody else. It has to be looked at. And a phrase I used speaking briefly on this to a friend the other day is a well-known phrase in the UK. It used to be. It's as good. You may as well be hung for a sheep as you are for a lamb. And what this relates to is some of the talk that's been coming out. I mean, the sanctions talk when it started is if Russia invades, we will do this. And it's again, you then get to the salami slicing part of what counts as an invasion. But we've also had people saying, well, maybe we should sanction them anyway, just as a fact for causing the situation in the first place. Which, of course, I would say is not correct. They haven't caused it and they haven't reacted to it either. Um, the point is, and this is a little bit about my Scandinavian heritage coming in here, because if you read the old Icelandic sagas, which I've always said are the best way of understanding how international law and diplomacy works, you would find out that sanctions work very much like taking a case, the Vikings did, taking a legal case to the Althing. It was a way of settling things later after the event when an agreement couldn't be reached at the time. And a classic example being Viking A wants Viking B's cow. Viking B says, F off, I'm not selling. Viking A says, well, I'll take it. And they take it to court. And that court then sorts out what the price should be for the cow. So sanctions are like this. I view that in that way. They're saying to Putin, this is what Ukraine will cost you if you want it. If you take Ukraine, this is the price. Literally, this is the price you will pay for it. And that, I think, is quite revealing. Because at the end of the day, also looking at the negotiations as well. People don't negotiate for no good reason. They don't negotiate for the sake of it. They negotiate because they have to. And let's assume for 1 minute that the deployment of Russian troops in the vicinity, in the region of the Ukrainian border, within 200 miles of the Ukrainian border, is a fact, and the numbers are correct. Well, maybe that's what it takes to get the United States to negotiate with you, because I got a funny feeling that if those troops were not there, the United States wouldn't be interested in negotiating, because the only thing they take seriously is hard power at the end of the day. And I think it was a US gangster that once said that people respond more to a kind word and a gun than they do just to a kind word. And I think that reflects the mentality very, very nicely. Without a large military deployment and a capable military deployment, there would be no real interest in negotiating on the American side. And this does beg the question as to what would happen if people suddenly pile on the sanctions the moment, if, for instance, there was a security vacuum and some Russian troops had to cross in to fill that vacuum, if there was a major assault and the Russians had to respond against the Donbass and the Russians had to respond to it to repel that offensive, and the West then piled on the full suite of sanctions that they've been discussing, none of which I believe have actually been agreed at the moment. So they can't even agree with themselves what the price is they want for the Ukraine. But if they then pile on those sanctions, then you have to say, well, if he's got, if you know, if I were Putin and I have now had to pay the full price that I have been threatened with for doing something that doesn't actually change significantly the layout, the delineation of territory within the Ukraine, what exactly do I have to lose? And it almost starts to look as if it's bait to say, well, come on, take it. The same way, and other commentators have said this, that the way that embassy staff are moving out of the center parts, out of Kiev and the central parts of Ukraine. The Ukraine government seems to be moving out of Kiev towards Lvov. And such, leaving these vast areas effectively opened because without the authority of government being active there, very soon things quickly fall apart. My own view remains that you'll see balkanization, certainly in the Russian-speaking parts. But it looks more like a withdrawal. I mean, you can understand why it's a basket case. Who would want to be responsible for it? But even so, you get a feeling that this is something that the Ukraine has been used as bait. Bait is the word, and this, of course, brings us back to Belarus, because if Russia had responded to the Ukraine bait and taken that bait, and there are troops, and something may have come close to the border of Belarus, or maybe crossed from Belarus, that would be the casus belli that NATO wanted to be able to take, had originally planned for taking action to invade Belarus. Maybe, positively. Um, is there any much point in sacrificing the strategic depths because Ukraine goes quite a long way east for Belarus? Well, good question. But the key thing on the Ukraine always was the Crimea, and NATO lost the Crimea on day one of the Maidan revolution, the regime change operation then, and therefore the rest of the territory ultimately the main strategic importance of the Ukraine was taken. Secondary strategic importances are there in spades, don't get me wrong, they are there. They reach a long way into the southern heartland of Russia. But Belarus, as we've already discussed, has a much greater immediate significance. If they could grab all of Belarus, that would isolate Kaliningrad, that would strengthen the hold on the Baltic states. So possibly it would be losing, swapping a stronger hand for a weaker hand. Um, but maybe Putin's realized this and is going to ultimately take both and actually get his buffer zone, because the more success he gets, the stronger his position, the more the West has to negotiate, and the better the terms will be. And hopefully, personally, I have to say, I would rather have cheap petrol and gas, and cheap gas matters more to me than Ukraine independence. I'll be totally blunt and honest, and I wish my nation's leaders, my country's leaders here in the UK, would also realise that this is something that affects ordinary people, the people of Britain, whom they are supposed to represent far more, and not the interests of Ukrainian people who didn't elect them at all. Well, thank you very much. I hope I've not too much of a rant. Oh my goodness, nearly 20 minutes. I hope not too much of a rant. I hope it makes sense. I hope you've enjoyed. If you do, please press like. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, please do hit subscribe. It helps, it's free, and it helps the channel to grow. If you'd like other people to hear what I have to say, please hit share. And if you have anything to say on this subject, or indeed the channel in general, please leave a comment, and I will respond as quickly as I can and to the best of my ability where it is relevant to do so, where it's appropriate to do so. Thank you very much, and I hope you will join me for the next video.